Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar in our monthly series of webinars. This one being on litter and antisocial behaviour in the Lake District National Park. My name's Christian and I'm the communications lead for Friends of the Lake District. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you've never been to one of these webinars before, um, basically, hopefully, you will be able to see us and our slides, but we can't see you. You are, however, able to ask questions at any time throughout this presentation. You do this by finding the Q&A button that might be at the bottom of your screen or at the top, depending on how it's configured. Press that button and type a question into the box. At the end of this presentation, we will endeavour to answer as many of those questions as we can. A bit of a change to the published programme. Unfortunately, Kate Andrews can't join us today, but instead we have for you Steph Gardiner, who is our engagement trainee, and Jeremy Smith, who is the head of campaigns and engagement here. So without further ado, I am going to pass you on to them.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Today we're going to be talking about littering and the antisocial behaviours in the form of fly camping, fire pits, disposable barbecues that are taking place in the Lake District. We're also going to be discussing the results of our recent litter survey that has been completed by locals and visitors about their experience of these behaviours in the Lake District and Cumbria. We have around 15 slides to show you, and there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So our first problem, litter. Litter doesn't just have a visual impact, causing frustration and annoyance to people who see it. Litter creates toxins and pollutants that are harmful to wildlife, livestock and people. It clogs and pollutes our waterways and impacts our soils, disrupting ecosystems and having detrimental effects on the food chain, including our own. It can kill animals through entanglement and digestion, and it can cause wildfires. And our second problem is fly camping and the confusion between wild camping and fly camping. So people have it in their mind that wild camping is or should be legal, but without knowing kind of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So wild camping is illegal across the Lake District unless you have permission from the landowner. However, it has been widely accepted for many years as long as the wild camping guidelines and the countryside code are followed. And this is where the confusion lies, because not a lot of people know what the wild camping guidelines are or what the countryside code consists of. And we've seen a rise and an increase in the fly camping that's being experienced here in the Lake District since the Dartmoor ruling. And just to go over a bit more about what the Dartmoor ruling is. So it is now legal in Dartmoor, and it's the only place in England and Wales where it is legal to camp without the landowner's permission. But you must still follow strict rules, and you can only camp in designated open moorland areas. So many of the kind of wild camping and the backpack camping guidelines and the countryside code must still be followed. So just to kind of clear up that confusion a bit more, we've got a slide here going over the differences between wild camping and fly camping, and I'll just go over some of them now with you. So wild camping, or backpack camping as we just mentioned, it's called backpack camping because everything you take with you, including your tent, fits into a backpack, and everything that you take in must be carried out It's pitching for no more than one night, arriving late and leaving early to avoid disturbance to others, arriving by foot to open countryside in a remote area well away from roads and dwellings, camp above the highest fell wall, away from residential areas, away from towns and lake shores, camp in small groups with tents placed in inconspicuous places, leave no trace, have no fires. Toilet duties must be carried out at least 30 metres away from the nearest water source, and if it's more than a week, it needs to be buried or taken away with you in a nappy bag, and all sanitary items must be carried out with you. So what are we seeing then in fly camping? Well, it's highly problematic because people are coming in larger groups and ignoring the backpack camping code. They're camping in inappropriate places, such as beside lakes, in residential areas, and beside roads. Involves campers often staying for longer periods of times, often leaving litter and equipment, such as chairs, inflatable beds, tents, and whole encampments in some cases, leaving that behind, and then often having barbecues and fire pits, which are scarring the environment and destructing habitats. And just to go over how destructing the barbecues and fire pits can be. So unauthorized campfires and barbecues have contributed to a huge increase in wildfires, with 564 incidents in England and Wales by June 2025. And this is a 717% increase from the same period in 2024. So they really are causing a problem and they really are a risk. So just to go over a couple of case studies now. So a couple of places that are really being impacted by littering and fly camping. Our first one is the village of Martindown. If you're not sure where that is, it's North Lakes, just between Ullswater and Haweswater. So they have had a season of dangerous open fires and abusive illegal campers, and they've been suffering since February half term. So this is kind of described as the start of the season because it's when your campsites reopen, and that season continues through until October half term. It's been worse this year, which could possibly be due to the warm weather that we've been having, the really dry spells we've had from spring and into our summer. And it's become commonplace for people to turn up and stay for days using the village as a campsite, even though it is private land. There's been an increase in fire pits and throwaway barbecues. And as we mentioned on the previous slide, this is a real risk for wildfires, and the residents are aware of this and they're scared by this. Martindale is in a valley, so if a wildfire does occur, it will just sweep through the valley, and the residents have said the only way they can get out is via a helicopter. There's a sense of lack of power when residents have seen individuals wild camping or littering and they've spoken to them and let them know that this isn't allowed. They're getting abuse back. Rangers are limited, they're also getting abuse back, and all they can do is advise people. They can't actually enforce people to move on. It's been reported that the police seem rather uninterested, and fire brigades will not get involved unless the barbecue or the campfire becomes a wildfire. So in its sort of campfire barbecue state, then they won't get involved. They're not interested. There's also a sense of an up yours attitude because people are unaware of the wild camping guidelines and the countryside code. They don't see that they're doing anything wrong. So they're kind of like, I have a right to be here, you can't tell me to move on. And this attitude, unfortunately, is being seen to increase as well. They say the situation is only getting worse, and residents are worried it will continue to do so before it gets better, and they're worried about what this turning point would be. Okay, so our second case study is at our reservoirs here in the Lake District, so Haweswater and Thirlmere. So they have seen trails of destruction being left by illegal campers. They're seeing that lower branches of our older trees are being broken down for firewood, for fire pits. And this has now escalated to the point where people are cutting down young trees as well. They believe that the increase in fly camping and damage to woodlands and fire pits is a social media craze, and people are seeing it online and going, oh, well, they're doing it, so that must be okay. So I'm going to go and do the same thing. And they're not checking what the guidelines are for national park or wild camping or countryside code. They're getting all their information from social media. So if social media is promoting fly camping or wildfires or sort of fire pits, that is the behaviour that is continuing, being replicated. And United Utilities have warned that if this destruction keeps happening in the form of cutting down and damaging our trees, that there just won't be a forest left. So they have now brought in a security firm to patrol at night and move campers on, and even issue fines. And just to go over sort of some figures for how bad the situation is there, how often these instances are occurring. So last bank holiday alone at Thirlmere, 88 people were spoken to and moved on who were camping or planning to. 12 campfires were extinguished and 13 inappropriate campsites were discovered. At Haweswater, 46 people were spoken to about who were camping or planning to. 5 fires were extinguished and 6 campsites were broken up. So this is at 2 places in the Lake District on one weekend. If we think of how large the Lake District National Park is, and how many instances might then be happening on one bank holiday weekend or in 1 week or in one season, you start to see how numbers are gradually and very quickly actually increasing, and then starting to see and understand how problematic and serious this problem is.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for very helpfully and clearly describing the nature of these problems in the Lake District. Here at Friends of the Lake District, every year we're contacted by people asking us what we're doing about this issue, what they can do themselves. What we found this year, though, is that more people were getting in touch, and they were getting in touch with us earlier. And so we decided that what we normally do, which is to provide information that people can display, reiterating the countryside code and so on, wasn't quite enough, and that we wanted to get to the heart of the issue. Also to confront the response that we sometimes hear from the National Park Authority and others, that the situation isn't getting any worse. It's no different from other years. We thought then that we would run a survey to capture a more definitive, comprehensive snapshot of what it's like over the summer, in part to rebut that notion that it's no different from previous years. So we opened our survey in June. It's still open. So we've got a total of 785 respondents. It might still go up a little bit. We're going to close it at the end of this month. Most of those people are living in Cumbria. There are also some people who have seen it as visitors. Almost all of them have encountered littering on their walks or travel around the Lake District. And a very large majority have also encountered wildfires, barbecues, or fly camping. And as you'll see here, the most common locations of this are around Ullswater and Derwentwater, but it's also, seen in quite high levels in many other sites across Cumbria. That last point then in orange about the reaction that people are receiving when they're questioning behaviour, it's almost the worst part of it, because it means that a lot of people in the comments they put to the survey, are telling us that they're no longer comfortable walking around certain areas. They're not able to enjoy the landscape around their own home, and that for at least a large part of the year, that they're simply not going out into those areas because of this fear or reality, perception or reality, that they will get an aggressive response that they find quite intimidating. I think the other aspect to it that we see is that people end up trying to solve the problem themselves. When they do, if they do go for a walk, they'll end up picking up the litter themselves, and there's already that sense of despair that the situation isn't going to be resolved. I think that comes through here on this next slide, where you see that a majority, nearly 60%, haven't reported what they have encountered. And from the survey itself, it's not possible to know whether that's because people don't know who to report to, or because they don't expect anything to happen from reporting it. But in some of the qualitative feedback we're getting, there is that sense that people are being passed around. There are a large number of agencies who have a stake in the issue, who have a stake in managing the landscape in Cumbria, right down from the police, the councils, Lake District National Park, other landowners, including the National Trust. And so we've heard directly from the survey, and also from people that we've encountered in our work around the county, people saying to us that they get bounced around, that they'll phone the council to be told to phone the police, and then they'll be told by the police to speak to the relevant landowner, who will then send them back to the council. And so they'll go round and round without getting anywhere. And so the occasions where people report something has been done to positive effect are then quite a large minority, really. In most cases, nothing is necessarily done, and all that is offered to people is sort of expression of sympathy and resignation. When we think about what the solutions are, I mean, I think ultimately what we need to see is a reset in public understanding of what's acceptable in terms of behaviour when visiting the Lake District, indeed the whole of Cumbria. Partly it's about education and re-establishing certain norms, the countryside code, increasing familiarity with that, greater understanding of what is permitted and what is not permitted. At the same time, it's hard to imagine that people who are, as some of the earlier slides showed, setting up camp by a lakeside and then abandoning all their rubbish and leaving the residues of a fire, are doing that in the belief that it's allowed. I think as much as uncertainty as to what is permitted may be true in some cases, I think there's a strong sense, as Stephanie was alluding to as well, that people think they can do what they like and that nothing will happen to them, and that they're acting without consequence. And so part of the solution then, I think, is about much more visible interventionist approach from the relevant authorities to, like, raise the threshold which people are willing to sort of chance their arm in terms of what they can get away with, make it a lot harder for people to do what they have been doing. And also, I think, publicizing what happens to people when they are found to be in breach of a public space protection order and they are issued with a fine, and to show that, that the councils and the police are acting. And I think that's, it's not that we're saying that with a view to punishing people. I think the primary purpose of what we're describing here is more deterrence, and also, and I think quite importantly, sending a signal to residents that they haven't been abandoned, and that they don't have to be solving the problem themselves or avoiding going to certain areas, that they can start to have greater trust that something will be done. If we have a look at what we ourselves have been doing, We are not only a campaigning and advocacy organisation, we are active on the ground. We do get our hands dirty. We have for a number of years organised litter picks. You see here my colleague who was unable to join us today, Kay, with Michael Patillo, who picked up some litter doing one of his travel programmes. We don't imagine by doing those annual litter picks and other community events that we are solving the problem. We are drawing attention to it in the amount of litter that we gather. We are also trying to give agency to people, inspire them into other forms of action, including political action, to feel connected to the landscape and not want the same situation to be carrying on. So we do this very much, if you like, for its exemplary effect of showing that things can be done differently. We are also very active as an organisation, trying to assert a different model of tourism, a different balance being struck between people's right to visit and enjoy the beautiful landscape here, and also the needs of local residents and the needs of the wider environment, nature and wildlife. One step towards that, we believe, is the introduction of some form of visitor tax that raises more funds for the management of the park, such that there can be more rangers, more patrols, and indeed also the other side of it, more informational materials widely displayed that makes clear what is and what isn't allowed. Looking at what other parties have been doing, and indeed what we are trying to hold them account for, the National Park, some of you may have seen, has been running a promotional campaign in posters and online, advocating for people to undertake responsible visits and to be the right kind of visitor to the Lake District and be kind to the Lake District. Various landowners, including United Utilities, National Trust, have rangers who are trying to monitor and crack down on people fly camping and littering. As Stephanie mentioned, those people don't have the authority to move people on directly. Cumberland Council already in May did introduce these public space protection orders, which prescribe certain types of behaviour in certain designated areas, and then breaches of those designations result in fines. Westmoreland and Furness Council has now agreed to do the same, and is consulting about the scope of those, and that there's potential for larger fines as well. So that deterrent effect is increasing. We like to think that the energy that we have given to the issue, but also fundamentally the work of local groups on the ground, collecting litter, making a noise, getting in touch with local media, getting attention also ultimately in the national media too, has put some of those responsible onto the back foot and made them take the issue a lot more seriously. We've seen in the last couple of weeks the police fire and crime commissioner David Allen, he's a commissioner for Cumbria, has, for want of a better phrase, banged heads together, convened a meeting of all the relevant actors and insisted and encouraged them to do more. I think that's triggered a response from Westmoreland Furness Council. Now, obviously, we want to see that actually converting through into change in practice. At the moment, the rhetoric has become a lot more positive. There has been some movement in terms of the number of patrols, the more targeted nature of patrols as well. And we hope that that continues, and that also that it's not something that's forgotten next year. If we do start, I mean, I know that the season gets longer, but as we come to enter winter and this by nature becomes less of a problem, we don't want, if you like, to reinvent the wheel next year and have to start shouting again in March. that things should be done differently. We don't want the issue to escalate before we have to do that. Finally, a sense of what you yourselves can do. Of course, you can speak out, you can report issues directly to the relevant council who's responsible for the area where you encounter such an issue. There is an ongoing consultation being run by Westmoreland and Furness Council about the potential introduction of new public space protection orders, extension of scope. And so that's something that anyone is able to contribute to and make their voice heard. It's also possible for you to join litter picking groups in your areas. There is a large network of litter picking groups. You're also able to borrow litter picking equipment from ourselves. If you want to form your own group and need a bit of a kickstart in terms of organising that, we can provide both equipment and advice. And I think the wider sense also is to keep active in terms of engaging with councils, the police and others who are ultimately accountable to you, making sure that your voice is heard and that all of those who are responsible understand that this is an important issue. It has an effect on people living in the Lake District, not only visually but psychologically as well, in undermining people's confidence to act out their lives in certain parts of the county. So I do hope that you found this presentation from Stephanie and myself interesting, and we would welcome any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeremy and Stephanie. We do indeed have some questions for you here that are coming in. First of all, I just wondered, as a general thing, why do you think things have got worse? It does feel sort of anecdotally that has got worse. We've seen through the survey that it has. But what's the reasonings behind that, do you think?
Well, yes, I mean, it's interesting, and it's probably hard to be precise and definitive about it. I think there is a sense that COVID increased the likelihood of people taking holidays within the UK, and that it's possible that activities that people would otherwise have undertaken in Spain or Greece were transposed to the UK. And that people have brought those behaviours into the Lake District. I think, I mean, a risk of going all sort of sociological on us. I mean, there seems to be a sort of generational element to it, in the sense of norms that may have been habitual for older generations, no longer being habitual for current generations. Yeah. But I also think that there is a large part of it then is that sense that there is no consequence. So we can never know whether an individual is acting out of ignorance of the rules or disregard for rules. But the lack of consequence means that people can act in these ways without feeling that they're doing anything wrong. And until that sense of, or until that consequence is re-established, then I don't think we'll see a change.
I think just to add on to what Jeremy said, I know from conversations I've had with individuals at events that the countryside code was something that was part of the curriculum. It was something that you were taught. And I think some schools still do it, especially if you're looking at rural schools, but it's not, I don't believe it's part of the curriculum anymore. So it can easily get missed off. So education is definitely needed around the matter and what is and isn't allowed. Social media is a massive influence, unfortunately. A lot of people choose where they go on holiday and what they do on holiday by seeing what other people are doing on social media, what's trending and what they've done when they were there, you know, whereas we may have in the past looked at Lake District National Park website, or even at our website, where we put on the information about, you know, what is allowed and what you can do. They're getting that from social media now that isn't discussing what is and isn't allowed. In some cases it is. So the Lake District National Park now have some influencers who are saying what is and isn't allowed. But yeah, I think it's going to take more. And I think Jeremy's right. I think there do need to be kind of tougher sanctions and consequences for people's behaviour.
There's a really interesting points there. And actually, some of the questions we've got coming in relate to some of that. So Basak is just asking, and we may not have the figures for this, but perhaps we have a sense, is there a change in the profile of visitors who are actually going to the Lake District? So has that shifted the way people behave? And possibly you've kind of already answered that, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an assumption. I mean, we don't want to claim that this is only an issue caused by young people from outside the area coming in for the weekend or whatever. I think, you know, we've had evidence coming through that it's local people as well are also thinking that they'll go off for the night somewhere. But perhaps there is, as I was alluding to, that change in holiday patterns triggered by COVID, and then people in effect finding that they can have the sort of time that they want to have, but by a lake in a beautiful setting, with loud music and camping and drinking and smoking and so on. One thing I didn't mention in the slide, just on that issue of whether it's getting worse, though, I think our data is showing it's about 75% of people in our survey saying it's getting worse. I mean, that's anecdotal. I mean, it's not a definitive answer in itself, but I think it's still quite a strong signal that people's experience of these issues is that it has been getting worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, or some comments and questions from Catherine, who I happen to know is a resident of Martindale. I hope she won't mind me saying so. So she does make first of all, a point that she is one of those litter pickers, and she says here, more of us who pick up litter hate the whole happy litter wombles image, which I can totally understand, and have seen on recent Facebook posts that they're sick of doing it and wonder whether a new resistance might be to actually, for those litter pickers to just refuse to do it, see how bad it gets before the authorities take it more seriously. I just wonder, Jeremy, do you have a sense? Are we talking to partners such as the Lake District National Park Partnership, and do we have a sense that they are taking it seriously, or is there a sort of feeling that they're only just cottoning on to this?
I don't know about only just. I mean, I think as the year has gone on, I think they have been forced to take it more seriously. I mean, we've had members and supporters forwarding us messages when they've had direct contact with the park, and initially, back in March, April, those responses were fairly brief, saying, well, there's not a lot we can do about it. And the length and the depth of those responses now that people are getting is much greater. So I think the park has been forced to take it more seriously. Partly that they're running their own social media campaign. I think they've become a little bit defensive about it as well. We hear lots of references to their own lack of resources, which at a certain level one can acknowledge and recognise, of course. Not only the park, but also the local government bodies, councils, have seen a drop in their revenues from central government over a long period now, and one can sort of acknowledge that without necessarily accepting it as a complete excuse either. I mean, they have to make choices about how they deploy the resources that they do have, and we also want them to be open to the idea of levying a visitor tax in part to raise funds for this sort of thing. I mean, on the direct point being raised, I mean, I can very much understand why it would be annoying and or almost patronizing as well to have this sort of image of litter wombles and so on, because it shouldn't be for people to be doing it themselves and having to in this almost sort of permanent unwinnable task of trying to keep up with the littering that's going on at the moment. It does need resolving. I'd have to think a bit more about the tactic of stopping. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one, certainly. I mean, certainly people should feel no obligation to keep going if they're worn out by it.
Absolutely.
And I think as the more of us that are raising our voices and trying to apply pressure on the councils and the National Park in particular to do more themselves, hopefully that will ease the need for people to be doing it themselves.
Yeah. Catherine also makes another good point and another good question, which is around this idea of what is illegal. So, because we often talk about fly camping and wild camping, and one is allowed, but yeah, do you think both of you that there should be a lot more clarity around what's actually illegal in the park, not just around camping, but also so Catherine also makes a point about vans, so camper vans where you can park up overnight. There's a lot of confusion about, well, there seems to be because people seem to be doing it, that you can somehow pull up in your camper van in LA by and just sleep in the national park, and that's fine. And it doesn't seem to be a sense of, this is actually illegal. And if authorities sometimes are saying that they can't enforce something, then how is it illegal? Because surely if it's illegal, then it should be enforceable. Is there just some confusion around that? Is that something that maybe just needs more clarity?
I think part of it, as I mentioned, I think some of these forms of behaviour, if you camp overnight by a lake, go to the toilet in the bushes, and then leave a big pile of rubbish and residues of a fire, and maybe even the tent itself behind, I don't think people are doing that because they're confused as to whether it's allowed or not. I think they know it's not. But of course, I mean, you're right to say that there is uncertainty around other forms of behaviour in terms of where you can park overnight. The exact definition of wild camping, and that there is an ambiguity. It's technically illegal, but it's more or less tolerated under certain conditions if done in certain ways. So I do think there is scope for clarifying that, more that can possibly be done in certain forms of signage. But then indeed, signs themselves don't work if there's no enforcement of breaches of whatever it is that they're prescribing or allowing. So I think you always have to have that element. And I would be hopeful, and this is probably an optimistic scenario, that if there has been a sort of a tipping point which enabled this sort of behaviour to become very prevalent into certain groups of people thinking, well, we can do that. Why not have a fun weekend in the Lake District with camping out and having a fire and so on. And I think we can have a new tipping point away from that through this sort of mixture of high publicity enforcement in a few cases, alongside some of that longer term informational, educational endeavours.
Just to add on, I do think there needs to be some sort of more clarity. And how do we show that clarity? Is it through education? Is it through campaigns? Is it through signage? And I think the Dartmoor ruling has kind of added to the confusion, and the right to roam in Scotland as well is also different, so that can add to the confusion. The other issue that we have here in the Lake District is we have public land and we also have private land. So if it's privately owned, if you're starting to look at farmland, then the police have kind of no say on that land to enforce it. So they say that's your land, that's for you to kind of deal with. And in that situation, there's not a lot farmers can do because they're getting the same abuse back. And again, sort of national park rangers can't enforce because they've not got the power to. And in that situation, the police would still say to the individuals, go to the national park. So I think as much as there needs to be clarity on what is and isn't allowed, it's about clarity on who's almost responsible and who to go to, and power to be given as well to the landowners.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of interesting points around. So you mentioned a bit of visitor levy there, Jeremy, and I suppose we've got someone here who is so Basak again is just asking, should there be more members of staff? I'm assuming from the national park itself working in the area at particular times, busy times like bank holidays, things like that. But I'm guessing it is who pays for that and how, where does that money come from? And so I'm guessing, would we see a visitor levy as being one of those tools we could use or the park could use to fund that?
I think we do think that, yes. The revenue or the budgets for the park and for the local government has declined significantly over the last 15 years or so. And a visitor charge raises those revenues in a targeted way, and it's akin to other forms of tax or levy that are charged on particular users of particular things. It's also very common in other cities and regions across Europe. So many of us who have been on holiday, I myself, in the summer went to the Netherlands, stayed in a town called Groningen, and there it was €4 per person per night that we paid on top of the cost of our accommodation. And many people would find that normal and have found it normal in their holidays. There is a complexity in terms of the types of visitor levy that can legally be applied. At the moment in England, only some form of vehicle charge is within the powers of the local councils to introduce. And by its nature, that would raise funds targeted for alternative forms of sustainable transport and wouldn't be available for dealing with litter, wouldn't fund more rangers. An overnight stay tax, such as what I was describing for my own holiday, would raise funds that could be used for a much wider range of purposes, but is not currently an option open to local councils in England. It is open to local councils in Scotland and Wales. So that would need a change in law, and ultimately that's something that we would be asking for. In the meantime, we're hopeful that a vehicle charge may be under consideration and could come through. And at a certain level, if funding is raised from that pays for public transport, then that frees up funds from existing budgets that can therefore be used for this sort of thing, and the council will be able to respond to need and can be more targeted. I think the question also is leading to the need for rangers at particular times, particular places, particular days of the week and so on, perhaps in a more fluid and flexible way than they've been deployed so far. So I think that's certainly that either directly from a bed tax or indirectly from a vehicle charge that a visitor levy would help with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, we're just a couple of points really then before we wrap up. Catherine points out, and quite rightly, that middle class and older people are fly camping and van camping too. And I just guess it is important to recognize, despite what we see on social media sometimes of gangs of young people turning up from Manchester, that it isn't just a solely young person's problem. And Basak does point out that, antisocial behavior is related to social cultural backgrounds of people doing it, but also to apathy of others, apathy to others and the world. I guess it does feel like a large problem that not just Friends of the Lake District, but indeed all the partner organizations in the national park are facing. Okay, well, hold on, we've got one more. So Catherine has just asked one more, which is a really interesting one. What engagement with our local MPs is there about these problems? Let's just end on that. So what do we know of any sort of conversations that are happening with local MPs?
Yeah, I mean, we've been in touch with 3 of the local MPs, and we're aware that they are getting a lot of email traffic and other contact from their constituents asking about this. I mean, I'm copied into some of it myself, and I think those MPs have become, what's the word, sort of catalyzers, or they have multiplied the pressure that has come from their constituents, and taken it, if you like, directly then on to the councils, and to the Lake District National Park to encourage a stronger response. So I think, as far as we know, the MPs are very much aware and are getting involved and sort of backing up their constituents. Obviously, anyone who lives in the Lake District and in Cumbria should absolutely get in touch with their MP if they are encountering problems themselves, and encourage them to speak out further.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, thanks to our speakers for that. I thought it was a really fascinating introduction and discussion about these really difficult issues. I do just want to also mention that Catherine has commended Friends of the Lake District for being active in relation to these big problems. Appreciate that, Catherine. I know it is an ongoing issue and something that upsets so many people. I'm sure all of us on this webinar included. If I could just ask you, Jeremy, to slide us over to the next slide. I will just waffle on for a brief moment. So I just wanted to say, if you aren't already a member of Friends of the Lake District, do consider becoming one. Your support and your membership adds strength to our voice in matters like this. The more members we have, the stronger our voice is. We have various volunteer opportunities coming up. You'll find details on our website and some other events as well. There's a guided walk at Great Asby Scar, an amazing place if you've never been. 10th of September. It's our annual general meeting on the 20th of September in Penrith, and all are invited to that, whether you're a member or not. You'll learn lots more about us, and we will be discussing a couple of really interesting topics around visitor levy and planning. And the next webinar is the Hedges and Edges project, which will be presented by the wonderful Jack Ellaby. And so that will be coming up on the 24th of September. And if I can just nudge us on once more, just in relation to that, we have our latest appeal here. It's recognizing really that removing litter and antisocial behavior and dealing with that is just the start. We have an appeal, which is a nature of recovery appeal running at the moment related to our Hedges and Edges work. You'll find lots more details on our website, and links to this and some of the links that we've been discussing today will be shared on our website when this goes up, both in the webinar section of our own website and also in the notes on our YouTube channel, where you can watch this webinar again. So I just want to say thank you very much to Jeremy and to Steph for presenting today and giving us a really interesting session. And thanks to those who joined us. Please join us again next time.